everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics. This week's episode is a live one from Portland, where I ventured for both Image Expo and Comics Pro's annual meeting. Thanks to everyone backing me on Patreon, I was able to go to these events and record some rare in-person podcasts. And if you dig this kind of stuff, consider backing Off Panel on Patreon at patreon.com/offpanel. Your backing helps me go to events just like this. And in this final episode from the event, I'm joined by the creators of the upcoming Image comic series Blackbird. It's Jen Bartel and Sam Humphries. It's a super fun episode about their book and everything that inspired it. All right, so I'm here with the team behind Blackbird, new Image book, and I want to start at the beginning. I want to start at Minnesota.
You want to go all the way back?
I want to go to Minnesota.
Oh, yeah.
The funny thing is...
You want to go to the land of the lakes?
The funny thing, though, is like, I would have presumed that, you know, you guys are both Minnesota folk. Jen, you currently live there. I know you live in Los Angeles, Sam.
Yeah.
You guys have no connection through Minnesota. Is that true?
Yeah.
Yeah. We sort of did a flip-flop where I was born in LA and grew up there as a kid, and Sam grew up in Minneapolis, and then we switched.
Yeah. And we did not meet through a Minnesota connection at all, but Jen and I have not met through Minnesota. I haven't lived there since 1995, but we share an appreciation for the land of 10,000 lakes.
Oh. Well, that's good. So what is your story? Like, how did you meet? Like, how did you get connected in this world of comics?
So I think I might have mentioned this to you the last time I was on your show, but my first ever comic convention was Emerald City 2016. And Sam and I had kind of chit-chatted a little online. We didn't really know each other too well. And he came to say hello to me in person at my table. And not within 5 minutes, he was sitting behind my table, leaning in and quietly asking me if I'd like to work on a book together. Yeah, Sam is kind of amazing that way. And so, yeah, it felt like we had known each other for a really long time. And
yeah,
that's when we first started talking
I had to go for it. I was like, I might not get a chance later, so I got to ask now.
That was a really powerful 5 minutes. He went from introducing himself to behind the table, and now you guys are working together.
I didn't even know it happened. I just was like, oh, you're here now.
It's
Hello.
that Minnesota connection.
Exactly. It's so
miracle.
innate. I feel like I should have that with you guys because I'm from Alaska, and it's like vaguely like Minnesota.
It is. Yeah, we're both sort of like secondary Canadians in a sense.
I always say that I'm an honorary Canadian.
Yes.
The funny thing, though, is like for Alaskans, when you travel internationally, you can say, oh, I'm from Alaska. And they're like, is it difficult to move to your country? And I'm like, it's about as difficult as to move to the United States. They're like, so not very hard.
It'd be like, oh, so how are you enjoying your time in the States?
Yeah, you kind of get the weather of Canada, but no healthcare.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So, Sam, I'm gonna start with you on this question.
Okay.
Obviously, you were very aggressive in pursuing Miss Bartel's skills.
Yeah.
What is it about Jen's work that stood out so much to you?
God, I mean, I think primarily the fact that it does stand out.
Right.
Oftentimes in comics, we kind of get dragged down into a visual echo chamber.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't ever like that. I don't think it's good for comics, and I don't really enjoy reading comics that look all the same.
Mm-hmm.
Nor do I think that there's any real compelling reason for them to all look the same, except for readers and retailers like to buy what looks familiar to them.
Right.
Imagine I said that with air quotes.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, unless it's conventional wisdom, and conventional wisdom is often bullshit.
Right.
But none of that was really going through my head. I just really liked the fact that, I didn't really know this at the time, but Jen comes from outside comics. She has an illustration background, and she brings illustration sensibilities to comics. And people come and talk about her colors a lot, which are obviously beautiful, but it's not just the colors. It's not just the surface stuff. What Jen brings to comics seeps through all the way to composition and lighting and the way she approaches character and the way she approaches acting and all that kind of stuff. And that's the kind of artist I want to work with. So
yeah. I do think that there's something to what you just said about how like there is a like homogenous feel to comics sometimes. Mm-hmm. And the thing is like, I look at comics almost as like a comfort food for a lot of people. It's something that people feel good about. But the thing is like a lot of the comics that we love the most stand out because they do stand out, because there's something
Sure.
different. They take us in a different direction, like Wildcats Aliens.
Exactly. Way to segue into the best comic ever made. But yeah, like Wildcats Aliens, or I mean, hell, like people don't remember that, like, not just Dark Knight Returns, but also Batman Year One, which were almost in the same year, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Both of them were derided in some circles for looking different.
Right.
Because they didn't look like Jim Aparo, who I think is great. I love Jim Aparo, but I don't want every Batman comic to be Jim Aparo.
You know, this is just a really quick aside, but I had this exact same conversation where I brought up that exact same example.
No shit.
Like earlier today, which is really
Wow.
funny. All right, so besides his ability to choose exactly what I said earlier in conversation, Jen, what stood out? I mean, in those 5 minutes before he, decided to bring you on board, what was it about Sam's work that appealed to you as a creator?
Yeah, well, I actually think the reason why Sam and I first started chatting online before we met in person was because of his book Jonesy.
Oh.
And I love that book a
Yeah.
lot. I love Sam's writing. But I think really what struck me was when we met in person, Sam is just such a outgoing, personable, friendly person. And not to say that that's uncommon in comics, but certainly there are a lot of us who sit at desks all day long and don't have to interact with other human beings.
Right.
and are fairly awkward in social situations.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never considered myself to be like that. I tend to also be a very social person. And, in my interactions with people outside of the work environment, it's always been kind of easy. And I felt that with Sam. And I think as far as starting a partnership
Right.
with someone, especially with a creative endeavor like doing a creator-owned book, you need someone who's going to be able to help you carry that weight a little bit.
Right.
And Sam definitely carries that weight.
Thank you. I try.
I mean, I do think that's one of the underrated things about creator-owned. Like when you're choosing you're investing in a person as much as you're investing in the
Yeah.
project.
Yeah.
And if you don't have that kind of simpatico personality mix, something that you actually like, that's where things can get dark in ways you wouldn't even expect.
Yeah, and I think, Jen certainly didn't shoot me down behind her table at Emerald City, but I don't know that it became a really real thing that we were really, really going to do until after we got to know each other a lot better, mostly over text where we would talk about comics, and it wasn't just talking about, I want to do a comic that's like this, or this is the creative path I want to go down, but we talked a lot about the market of comics,
Sure,
and the business of comics, and we both realized that we came from different directions and ended up on the same page about how we feel comics should be marketed and how comics should be launched in the business of comics and how that would all work. And we realized that we would be good business partners on top of being good creative partners as well.
Yeah, I mean, the history of comics is laden with people who didn't have good business deals, didn't have the same insight into that, and that. I mean, that's a fantastic thing to talk about before you get started.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think you're right that most people undervalue evaluating that connection before they dive into a creator-owned comic. I mean, it's not uncommon for people to be like, we want our comic to run 30 issues, 40 issues, 60 issues. We have 60 issues of story. I don't doubt that you have 60 issues of story, but do you know this person well enough to be like, I want to be in their back pocket for 60 issues for more than 60 months?
Yeah.
It's a big commitment.
Yeah, I mean, even a 60-issue book, you look at some. I talked to Rob Guillory earlier.
Yeah.
And he did Chew for almost a decade.
Yeah.
And
8
that's
years.
a long time to spend with somebody. And it was him and John Layman, totally simpatico. It worked out great for them. They were a good personality mix, but sometimes that doesn't work out, which is why you have to have those hard conversations up front. Not that it was necessarily a hard conversation.
No, I think there's a lot of those discussions that happened very early on before we actually pulled the trigger on working together.
Right.
And I feel like more creators should consider approaching their books this way because, I mean, it sounds kind of extreme, but you're basically you're committing to stay together for a significant period of time. You're, it's weird to call it a work marriage or, something, but I've heard it be compared to making a baby together because you're essentially creating something out of nothing and you're collaborating on it. And
or it's being entrepreneurs together.
Yeah.
You're really creating a business together, and it's not, it may seem easy to start, but it's not always easy to get out.
Yep.
And we both have tech backgrounds, so I think we really respect that kind of small business. I
Sure.
mean, small business now means like somebody starting up like a P.O. box store in a strip mall, but like that small business entrepreneurial spirit of
Right.
like let's do this. But we've both seen, both from near and from afar, how that can go wrong, as most of America has since the mid 90s.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, actually, before we go anywhere, I do want to say that you're talking about the small business thing. That it is kind of like you guys are kicking off a small business in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And like, one of the things that I'm really excited about, Jen, you having a book like this to do is the fact that you have such a unique like entrepreneurial spirit when it comes to like
Yes.
merchandising and everything like that.
Yes.
Like that's an angle that I haven't really seen done a lot. Like from the start on a creator-owned book, and I think that's a really cool thing that you could do down the line. I know that's way down the line, but at the same time, it's
Is
cool.
it though?
Is it? I'm actually holding a card that has an enamel pin for Blackbird on it right now.
Tell them what it's for.
What, for Comics Pro.
It's a retailer exclusive pin for the retailers who are here in Portland for Comics Pro.
Yeah,
Right.
so Sam and I actually decided to invest in a table at Comics Pro, which I understand is something that not a lot of creators do.
I think we may be the first.
I don't know if that's necessarily true, maybe, but it's something that we talked a lot about because we felt like from the get-go, if we're going to do this, go big or go home, right? And I think that the retailers are just such an important part of this business, and if we are going to like break our backs creating this book, and if we're going to invest everything that we have into it, we want to be able to help retailers to also invest in it. And so one thing that we did is we created this limited edition enamel pin specifically for the book launch. And we will be giving it to retailers this weekend during Comics Pro to exclusively carry in their stores. And so a lot of retailers have reached out to me over the past year requesting to wholesale purchase my merchandise to carry in their stores. And, I've done it with some of them, but I really wanted to offer something that was exclusively for them. And so this pin won't be available in my store. I won't have it at conventions. You will have to physically go into a comic shop in order to actually get it. And we wanted to be able to offer it at cost to retailers.
That's awesome.
I'm not even going to sell it out of the back of my trunk either.
But yeah.
I mean, we got the question a ton yesterday at Image Expo. Is Blackbird an ongoing? And my answer was always, well, it is till it ain't.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and if we want to go as far as we want to go with this book, the retailers have to be our partners, or we have to engage retailers as our partners on this book.
Right. I mean, and I had a podcast yesterday with John Hendrick and Steve Anderson.
Great dudes, great retailers.
Yeah, and we were talking about a little bit about that earlier. But the thing is, we were talking about relationship building and how important it is for shops. Like when they have like somebody come into their shop that does a signing, it's like their customers come in and they're invested in them from that point on.
Yeah.
But it works both ways. Like if you guys invest in retailers, it makes it easier for them to invest in you.
100%. And this is obviously our first and foremost biggest priority is to make a really good book. But we also really wanted to take into account some of those extra things that we could offer to retailers to just help them in this business.
Yeah.
So we've thought a lot about it.
We want to make a great book, but we also want to make a book and create opportunities for the people who are going to sell it.
Yeah.
We want retailers to win off this book just as much as we want to win off this book.
So I have to ask, like, once you guys started texting, figuring everything out, at what point did Blackbird start coming together?
I mean, that would have to have been a conversation we had when early on, when we were like, okay, let's get serious about this. Let's do this. And we got on the phone, brainstorming session. We had already talked about, because I had already had a bunch of other potential books, other ideas. And I said, you know what, that's the wrong way to approach this. We should not try and make an idea that I already have work. We should come up with an idea together that is both of us. So it becomes a real passion project for both of us. And like we were talking about yesterday, that very first conversation started with me saying to Jen, what do you want to draw?
Yeah, and if you missed the Image Expo announcement, I gave Sam what I would consider to be a pretty challenging laundry list. I had been approached by other writers who had said that they wanted to work on a story with me and they wanted to write something for me to draw specifically, but they would pitch me their ideas and and not really be inclined to listen to mine. And I don't think it was malicious or anything. I think there are just a lot of writers that have their own vision, and that's okay. But for my first book, I really wanted to do something that would showcase the things that I'm actually very good at drawing.
Right.
And I know what I am. I know what I excel at and what my weaknesses are. And the list that I gave Sam had it had 20 things on it, but among them were things like demons and magic and beautiful people, and I wanted a lot of cool atmospheric lighting. I told him I really liked neon lighting. And I expected him to kind of also ignore my request. And I remember, well, I just, not to say that I had only had those kinds of experiences, but I just felt like I was giving you a list that was very discombobulated.
Sure,
you know?
yeah.
And so, yeah, I gave him this list. And he kind of dropped off the face of the planet for a couple weeks.
You're like, another one bites the dust.
Yeah. He didn't respond. I was like,
You got ghosted.
I scared him off. And then he called me up a couple weeks later and he goes, hey, how do you feel about it being set in LA? And I was like, oh, that ties together a lot of stuff that's on this list, actually. Yeah, I really like that. He goes, okay, bye. And I don't hear back from him for a couple days. And then the next time he called me is when he sort of pitched me his initial concept, which was, I would say it's pretty close to where we ended up, but that was really the starting point for us to start talking.
It had the core, yeah. And it was, it wasn't just a laundry list in our first conversations. It was wow, fucking Miyazaki is fucking great. Why? Why do we love Miyazaki?
Right.
That kind of stuff.
We did spend a really long time discussing what our favorite types of media were, who our favorite directors were, films, comics, books, shows,
and
everything.
and talking about what we wanted to bring from those influences into our book. And a coming of age story was a super early decision we made, and that was great. And honestly, it was easier for me in that way, because your artist is your first audience, right? And instead of me trying to second guess myself and being like, what does Jen want to draw? What would Jen be excited to draw? What would she be excited to be investing her time in for maybe years to come? I was like, well, I already have this list, so I can just dive in here and put these pieces together.
Well, and the other thing too is if Jen is invested in everything about the story because it's tailored for her, the book's gonna be better because of it. It's
100%.
It improves the quality or potential quality of the book if you listen to your collaborator and you guys truly collaborate.
And even now, as we're working on the actual issues, and Sam sends in scripts, I'll read through them, and sometimes there's something in there that I'm like, I'm not super into drawing that. He's extremely receptive to going back to the drawing board and kind of adjusting things or taking things out. He's not really married to anything that he sends me initially, and I've become increasingly aware that that's kind of rare.
Right.
So
yeah, I always appreciate that too.
I mean, it's, we keep talking about the laundry list that we came up with, and it was a laundry list of stuff that we both loved, and it just stands to reason that if a book is made of things that we both love, it's just we're both gonna put more and more of our passion into it. It's gonna be a true passion project between us. And I said this on stage yesterday. This isn't just a story that I wrote for Jen to draw, or my script that Jen is drawing. This is a book that could only exist when the two of us come together.
That's great. Well, for listeners that don't know, we actually have to talk about the elevator pitch of it.
Sure.
You called it Harry Potter meets Riverdale at Image Expo, which is, as I was telling Jen earlier, amazing. It's perfect. I mean, a lot of times those elevator pitches seem very made up and not making a lot of sense. That really evokes a specific idea. What can you tell listeners about the book? I know we're a ways out, but in its overall...
Yeah. The book is called Blackbird. It's about a young woman named Nina, and Nina discovers a secret world of magic in Los Angeles when her sister is kidnapped by this giant mystical beast, and Nina is the only person who can rescue her.
Nice.
Yeah, and we spent a lot of time talking about Nina as a character too. We went back and forth on it. I think that was kind of the pinnacle of our initial discussions about the book. And Nina is someone who is very smart and very capable, but has always kind of struggled through life because This event happened to her when she was 13 years old. She witnessed something that caused her to believe that magic was real at her core. And everyone around her told her that she was crazy. She was kind of this like crazy conspiracy kid, like teenager growing up. And I think it caused her to kind of have a little bit of a chip on her shoulder and to not really trust anyone. And even members of her family would tell her that she needed to move on. She's being crazy. And finally, when Blackbird actually begins, so in the first issue, it's the unfolding of her finally proving or like seeing the proof of this world.
It's like if you've always dreamed of a place that existed, and it turns out that the place that exists always existed around you in the dark corners of your city and places that you didn't look twice. It's like your eye was open and you look at everything differently and you realize that this place you were always striving for, you're always dreaming of, is right around you, and now you can finally see it and you can finally touch it. But of course, it's not all it's cracked up to be.
Right.
Yes.
There's always a darker side to the darker side.
Her dream has a dark side to it, and although this is what she's wanted for 10 years, it's not going to work out the way she always dreamed of.
So you started talking about influences earlier, which is perfect because I totally want to talk about that.
Yeah.
I mean, just looking at it, like looking at the promo art, it feels very LA. It feels very magical. Big part of that is like the colors. I mean, it's very important to that. Let's go on a quick tangent. I want to talk about your favorite like stories in those realms, like the things that kind of influence that, like LA stories, magic stories, coming of age. Like, what were the things you guys maybe revisited as you were rethinking or thinking about this book?
That's a good question.
We talked a lot about Spirited Away.
I was thinking that as you were talking about like the corners that you were there, but you couldn't find them.
100%. We both really, really love that movie. And, I don't necessarily want this book. I would never want to describe it as like a Miyazaki-esque story or being compared to Spirited Away because like
it's really too gritty for that.
Well, there's that, but also like we're not trying to chase after perfection, right? Like Miyazaki's perfect, Spirited Away is perfect. We're not trying to do that.
Right.
We both really love Spirited Away, and some of the elements that we loved about it were the character development of is it Sen?
Sen? Yeah.
Chihiro is her like actual name, but the development that she goes through during the course of that film was a big source of inspiration for us. And so, obviously there's similarities in like world building and things like that, but the thing that we really honed in on was like how much she grows as a character. And we wanted to be able to capture some of that with Nina as well.
Yeah, and I've always loved stories that are in that tradition, like Alice in Wonderland and Wizard of Oz and Labyrinth. I mean, really Spirited Away is influenced by that whole tradition of storytelling. It's coming of age through magical encounters of some kind. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I wanted to do that kind of story. We always joke that this is a story... It's like Harry Potter for people who are old enough to drink or old enough to have a fake ID.
All right.
So it's like sexier.
Exactly. if like
it's Hogwarts after dark.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to say it's for 21 and up or even 18 and up, but if you are old enough to even think about handling a fake ID, you're old enough to handle this book.
Well, I mean, one thing that's important to realize is the last thing the kids want is to be talked down to. And so if you deliver a story, like even Spirited Away, like that would probably have freaked me out when I was 5, but I had been like, I'm so stoked to be watching this because this is awesome.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
And it's funny because when I was growing up too, as a kid, as a teenager, like those were always the types of media that I was the most attracted to that remain the most memorable to me as an adult now. I remember watching like Satoshi Kon movies when I was a teenager and being like, I shouldn't be watching this.
See, my Satoshi Kon as a teenager was Jodorowsky films. I was like, I definitely shouldn't be watching this.
You feel a little bit like, oh, is this for me? But I love it. And like, I don't know, it just kind of sticks with you through adulthood.
I do think it's funny that we're all referencing animation for things like this. Animation, I feel like, is uniquely good at doing that, like delivering. Have you guys ever watched Mamoru Hosoda's movies? Like he did Wolf Children and Summer Wars and The Boy and the Beast.
I've seen Summer Wars.
Oh my God, those are so good. I love his stuff.
Is so good.
The Boy and the Beast is so good. Anyways,
Yeah.
random aside.
Yeah.
I do have to say, between the colors, which, neon is a big part of your aesthetic, and the titling, I immediately thought of Drive a little bit when I saw that. Obviously, you're not going to do Drive, hopefully.
No, but it's funny that you mentioned that because that was the other huge, at least visual influence for me. And I talked to Sam a lot about it. And even so our designer, Dylan Todd, who did the logo for us, the examples that I was sending him of what I was interested in and what my influences were, a big chunk of them were Nicholas Winding, I think you say Refn, I want to say, is the pronunciation of his last name.
At least down here in the States. I don't know if you knew that,
I'm
David.
so sorry if I mispronounced that.
In my country, we say Winding Refn.
But yeah, he directed Drive and Only God Forgives and Neon Demon, and his movies just have such a visual appeal to them, and they're so atmospheric, and the lighting is always so amazing.
Right.
And those were some things that I wanted to capture.
Yeah, and in Drive, I remember seeing it and thinking like that was a pretty good movie, but I loved the way he shot Los Angeles.
Right.
In that he didn't do the Rodeo Drive sign.
Right.
He didn't do like all the classic things that you've seen like a million times since Beverly Hills Cop.
He didn't tell his director of photography, just go get the usual.
Yeah,
Here's
exactly.
your checklist. Go for it.
Second unit director.
Right.
Yeah.
And he did that in Neon Demon too, where I feel like the most beautiful parts of LA, and this is a big conversation that we had when we were discussing what we wanted to do, is he kind of makes it a point to capture those areas that most people visiting LA would ignore,
Right.
but that LA natives immediately are able to identify.
Right.
And that's something that we wanted to do in the book as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's some crazy. I'm trying to think of how to describe them without spoiling them, but there's some LA landmarks that if you're a native, you're gonna say, oh hell yes, and if you're not a native, it's really going to expand your understanding of Los Angeles. It's going to add a dimension to your understanding of Los Angeles.
Right. I feel like, whenever you see something where they're just going through the playbook, it's kind of like you can tell it's kind of phony, that the person doesn't really understand the location.
Yeah.
And so when you do things like that, what you guys are talking about, it adds a real verisimilitude to it, where it connects you to it and you're like, okay, this is for real. This is really tying me into that world. I think that's great.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know. I get so upset in movies when they're like, we'll be there in 5 minutes. It's like, the fuck you will. You're trying to go from Westwood to Glendale. There's no 5 minutes, even in the middle of the night. So I put a lot of time and effort that will probably mostly go unnoticed into making sure that when the characters go from point A to point B, the things they see along the way, it actually makes sense. There's an actual real route that goes through Los Angeles.
Yeah, and we definitely don't want anyone to feel like this book is only for you if you love LA. But at the same time, I think the city of Los Angeles does actually play a very significant role in the story. It's kind of one of the characters. So it was really important for us to get it accurate.
Thematically, it makes a lot of sense. You don't have to know the street names to understand it, but
Right.
It's a city of illusions. It's a new city. It's a city that's always been a fusion of cultures, and all those things play into not just the characters of Blackbird, but really the foundation of magic in Blackbird.
Mm-hmm. So I want to talk about art for a minute.
Yeah.
Interiors, Jen, I know you haven't dove into the world of interiors in a very major way. You're working with Paul Reinwand on layouts for this. What is he bringing to it, and how does he help you fully realize his book in the best possible way?
Yeah, so Paul and I have been friends for a really long time, and I think it's kind of echoes what I was saying earlier about agreeing to work with Sam. It's very important, I think, to enter into these work relationships that are meant to last a long time,
right?
With people that you like and trust foremost. And so Paul definitely is a good friend, and I trust him. I trust his work. I trust his vision. And when we actually started seriously discussing me drawing a book, even though Sam has catered this book specifically to my strengths and what I'm interested in drawing, I still knew that for my first project, if I could, it would be nice to have help. And it's funny because someone once told me, and I feel like this is sort of a backhanded compliment, but someone once told me, Jen, the thing that I really like about you is that you're willing to accept help. And I was like, oh, I don't know if I should say thank you, or I don't know how to respond to that really, but I do think there's something there, because there are a lot of creative people, especially within comics, that are so precious with their work that they don't want to let anyone have any amount of control over what they're doing.
Right.
And I think at the end of the day, comic books are a team effort, and I think if there's anything that that you can get help on, I've never been one to assume that I'm the best at things, and so because I know that my strengths are the actual drawing part and not so much the storytelling part, it was really important for me that I have help with that segment of it.
Right.
Paul is a very, very talented and experienced storyteller, and so really what he's doing with the layouts that he's helping me with is providing a good flow, a good narrative storytelling, like technical standpoint.
Sure.
And yeah, he's just making my job a little bit easier, and so I really appreciate his contribution.
Well, I mean, I think a perfect example of what you're going through, we've seen before, like Batgirl. Babs Tarr came in, Cameron Stewart did the layouts,
Sure.
Yep.
and then by the time they got to Motor Crush, I mean, she does phenomenal layouts now. Like, she's incredible, and like
Yeah.
I think that stuff is awesome, and it's like, I don't know, I mean, it helps you play to your strengths even better.
Exactly. And, you know, Babs and I are friends, and we also come from very similar backgrounds. We both come from illustration,
Right.
and I think we have both kind of fallen backwards into the world of comics. And people are intrigued by our work because, to Sam's point, it's different. But that also means that we don't have like the years and years of background that a lot of exclusive comic artists have had. And so, yeah, I think having a little bit of help, having some training wheels at the beginning is only going to better both of our work.
Sure. I'm kind of curious, like, for you as a writer, like, if you're playing to somebody else who's kind of maybe defining the layouts a little bit, do you deal with Paul and talk to him about, you know, like how you might lay out the script or anything like that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. Paul's great. He's also a friend. It's just it's great to have a team of friends. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So you don't feel weird texting each other in the middle of the night if you have to. You're stuck on something or whatever. So yeah, we do. But primarily, I write the scripts for Jen, for Jen to draw. Paul is a fantastic storyteller. He's a great comic artist in his own right, and I think being able to do layouts for somebody else is an underrated talent that is hard, if not impossible, to spotlight.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But people will see it because the layouts and the storytelling choices that people will see in Blackbird are so different than the layouts and storytelling choices present in Paul's work, which are also very strong. And I think that speaks to Paul's skill and versatility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, he's definitely had to flex more to like my strengths, because it's ironic actually. Paul and I have basically opposite strengths and weaknesses, and so certainly when he's laying out this book, he's going a little bit against the grain of what comes naturally to him, but he's very aware of what I'm good at, and he's helping me a lot with like playing to those things. So.
And what we're doing is not new either. You know, this is like the division between layouts and pencils and inkers and color
Sure.
art that has gone all over the spectrum since the early days of the golden age too.
Right.
Using a layout artist and an artist and a color artist, having all three of those on one project is as old as comics itself.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I do think it's funny because, like, I feel like a lot of times when you see, like, you'll see, like, layouts and then, like, finishes and things like that.
Yeah.
There's so many different ways to phrase it.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I think sometimes people aren't even aware that there was a delineation there at some point just because the terminology kind of shifts and changes. I do want to ask about colors. I mean, Jen, I've mentioned already that, like, that's such a huge part of your aesthetic. You're working with Young Wilson on this. Was it a little weird to give that part up, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely it's always a little difficult to relinquish control, especially something that's such a big part of what I'm known for. But you know, I've known Nayoung a long time now, and she is so talented in her own right. And I think like she's working on a couple other projects. I think they've been announced. But
There was one announced. I don't
Okay.
remember what it was, but yeah.
Was it?
Okay.
No,
Okay, I'm just not gonna say it because I'm not sure if I can.
Sam's like,
But-
let's not get anybody in trouble.
Oh, I know what it was. It was
Right.
Blackbird.
Right. So I don't know which ones have been announced, but she also has been very busy. And yeah, she's been a graphic designer for a very long time, so she's super familiar with like print media, and she's got a really great sense of color and composition. And just like Sam and Paul, we are friends, and I think that's so important for communication. So when I initially approached her about doing the colors, we had talked at great length about what I was looking for with Blackbird, and it's funny, I actually had her watch some of the movies that we talked about.
Oh, funny.
Yeah, like I asked her to watch Drive and Neon Demon and things like that, because I wanted her to be able to understand like what kind of atmospheric lighting I was hoping for. And I also sent her a bunch of screenshots of different anime. So like I talked about Satoshi Kon earlier, who I love his work. But a big aesthetic influence for how we wanted the interiors of this book to look actually come from an anime called Michiko to Hatchin, which is from the same studio that put out Cowboy Bebop, actually.
Okay.
And it's a really cool, like, short, I think it's like a 26 episode series, and it takes place in Brazil, I believe. But the thing that I love about this show is that the characters themselves are so simple. They're pretty much all just flat cell shaded, rendered, but they're drawn in a really interesting way, and the backgrounds are like very soft and almost like blurred out. And I think this is kind of akin to what Fiona Staples does on Saga, where the backgrounds are always fairly simple, and they do a great job of receding so that the reader immediately knows where to look on the page. The characters jump out at you. And I think that Nayoung is doing an incredible job of making that happen with my line art.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So last question for you guys. We talked about promotion a little bit already, but I mean, one of the big things in comics these days is there's just a lot of comics. It was announced, your book was announced at Image Expo, a lot of books there. Like there's just more competition than ever. We're kind of in peak comics. Like, how do you make this book stand out amongst the rest? Obviously, it's going to have its own aesthetic standouts and everything like that. You have your enamel pins. What can you do to do that?
We've got a great plan to make this book stand out, and that's to crush it.
Project Crush It is go.
Wow.
We're going to slam dunk it. That's a great question, and I think without saying too much, one thing that we want to bring to Blackbird is an accessibility in the reading experience.
Right.
Jen was just talking about this. I have more than one very smart person who I know who's been like, "Oh, you write comic books? Oh, let me take a look at the comic." And they open a comic page and they go, "What do I read first? The words of the pictures?" And I'm like, God, I never think about this. How many
it's like a
comics
language.
have I written? And I've never thought about the fact that this isn't a super easy way to read something if you haven't been trained in how to read it. And I think there's a lot of things that go into that, like all the choices that Jen was just talking about backgrounds and where to focus, layout choices, number of panels in a page, where you have a lot of panels, where you don't have a lot of panels, how you guide a reader into that. I think a lot about Mad Max Fury Road, where George Miller was talking about the way that they framed it. Every time they framed a shot, they kept saying, "Put it on the T or put it on the cross, put it on the cross."
Right.
And they're talking about the cross that's like etched into the lens of the camera. You don't see it on the screen, but it shows the exact midpoint of the frame. And it's because if you put the most important thing on the cross, and people don't have to decide where to look when a new shot happens. And that's why a movie like Fury Road gets away with a lot of fast-paced, information-dense action in a way that a Transformers movie does not.
Yeah, and this is maybe going to sound slightly self-deprecating, but one of the very early things that I said to Sam was that I wanted to make a CW show in comic book form.
Right.
And, say what you will about CW shows or shows of that nature, like Riverdale, for example. But they're kind of like visual junk food, right? There's a reason why so many people enjoy watching those shows, and it's because they are so easy to consume.
Right.
There are people who have never picked up any fantasy genre thing in their life, and they will watch a show about space alien romances just because they're shot in beautiful lighting with beautiful people and they're on a network that is accessible to people who have never consumed that kind of media.
They're easy to understand without being stupid.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, well, some of them are stupid, but that's
Well,
okay. But
The ones we like are stupid.
so I think there's something really powerful about creating mainstream content that is easily consumable. And, you know, not to say that we're trying to make something, you know, stupid or basic, but I think there are some artists in any field, not just comics, but I think you have film fanatics who feel this way. I think you have, you know, in any industry, you'll find people who are not artists, they are artistes.
Right.
And I have never considered myself that. I would love to make this accessible to as many people as possible. I would love for it to be an easy, fun read that people want to share with their friends. And that was our initial goal with it.
Yeah, I mean, if you have me and Jen together, you consider our body of work, the styles that we've worked in before, we could have done something much more avant-garde, something much more in the vein of Our Love Is Real.
Yes. Oh, the transition is there.
I got it in there.
Yes, we've done it.
That was just for you. We could have gone for something that was much more avant-garde, much more challenging, but we very much wanted to go for something you could sum up in Harry Potter meets Riverdale.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Totally.
And for people who, you know, like yourself or other people we talk to who are like, God, that's such a perfect way to describe something, you're going to love the way we tell the story in the book too.
Right. I want to give you an example of kind of what you were talking about, where it's like it can be difficult for readers who are new to comics to like ingest some of them. My wife loves Jane Foster Thor. Like she thinks she's amazing. She loves Thor in general. She's like a massive Thor fan, but she never read any comics before. She found out there was Jane Foster Thor. She started reading it, and she was reading like the second volume of the book, and all of a sudden there was like an annual thrown in there with a bunch of different artists, and then there was reprints in the back of it, and she was so confused. She's like, am I supposed to even be reading this? It was almost like the experience was like punitive to her.
Yeah.
And it was fascinating because I never think about something like that because I'm a lifer. I'm like, oh, they just switched artists, whatever. And it's fascinating how somebody from outside of comics can bring this insight to me that I never would have thought of in a million years. But I think that's important, and I do think that there is value in the CW stuff. Look at the Berlanti-verse. I mean, you throw what's his face, the guy who plays Ollie, Stephen Amell, doing those crazy ladder exercises in there. Next thing you know, Green Arrow is the hottest thing in the world.
Yeah, I mean, Green Arrow. Hell, I mean, you have like the Legends of Tomorrow, and they're talking about like the multiverse and all that kind of stuff, and people can understand it. People can understand these really cool, out there, crazy, challenging concepts if you don't present them in a way that it assumes you understand the past 30 years of superhero comics, the past 60 years of sci-fi. You know,
Yes.
These things are not impossible for any audience to understand if you don't make it a punitive experience.
Right. I don't think anybody has really talked enough about the fact how insane it is that they did the Invasion storyline on television, which is pretty wild, but yet it was all a hit and people still did the crossover. I mean, it like if you make something accessible, like not to Field of Dreams it, but I mean, they will come. I mean, I think that is a really great approach for your guys' book.
That's the hope.
We think so. We think they're going to come.
Well, I'm excited for everybody to read it. Guys, thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with Jen Bartel and Sam Humphries, the creative team behind the upcoming Image comic series Blackbird. You can find Bartel on Twitter at HeyJenBartel, on Instagram at HeyJenBartel, and on our website at jenbartel.com. You can find Humphries on Twitter at Sam Humphries. If you're a fan of the show, there's some big news. Off Panel now has a Patreon. If you like the show and want to support it, consider backing it on Patreon at patreon.com/offpanel. There are fun rewards and insider information you can get if you do. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Maria Schweitzer, Matthew Taylor, Tyler Turner, Dan Guarino, Dan Lee, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Evan Blazer, Brian McRae, Ira James Udaskin, Benjamin Birdie, Henning Allers, Modern Magic Stories, Nick Hall, Bruno Batista, Abraham Reisman, Adrian Diaz, Bobby Angus, Bjorn Basin, Darren Neely, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Michael Perlman, Phil Nall, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Benjamin Shipper, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Maxwell Schmidt, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Lou Avino, Christopher Carter, Nicholas Keslick, Greg Rucka, Ryan Mail, Adam Highfill, Nicholas Gardner, Andrew Corrigan, Fiona Staples, Chris Morris, Chris O'Halloran, Mark Abbott, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim DeMonacos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. Don't forget to like the show on Facebook at /sketched, that's SKTCHD. Follow it on Twitter at @sketchcomic or follow me at @slicefriedgold. Want more from Off Panel? Subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher and give the show a rating or review while you're at it. A quick thanks to the band Wolfpack, whose excellent track Outro from their album Volmilch opens and closes the show now. Give them a listen as they're totally rad. Thanks for listening and tune in next week for another episode.